Welcome back to Major Antonio's presentation of London to Ladysmith via Pretoria by Winston S. Churchill. Today, 125 years ago, the future Prime Minister was in the midst of a dangerous journey to the battlefields of the Boer War in South Africa. We shall follow his footsteps as he narrates his adventures himself. Subscribe to our channel so as not to miss anything. Chapter 5, A Cruise in the Armored Train. Estcourt, November 9, 1899.
How many more letters shall I write you from an unsatisfactory address? Sir George White's headquarters are scarcely 40 miles away, but between them and Estcourt stretches the hostile army. Whether it may be possible or wise to try to pass the lines of investment is a question which I cannot yet decide, and meanwhile I wait here at the nearest post collecting such information as dribbles through native channels and hoping that early events may clear the road. To wait is often weary work, but even at this exciting time I come to a standstill at length with a distinct feeling of relief. The last month has been passed in continual travel. The fading, confused faces at Waterloo as the train swept along the platform, the cheering crowds at Southampton, the rolling decks of the Dunottar Castle, the suspense, the excitement of first news, a brief day's scurry at Capetown. The journey to East London by the last train to pass along the frontier, the tumultuous voyage in the Umzimvubu amid so great a gale that but for the Royal Mail the skipper would have put back to port, on without a check to Pietermaritzburg, and thence, since the need seemed urgent and the traffic slow, by special train here, all moving, restless pictures, and here at last, a pause. Let us review the situation. On Wednesday last, on November 1st, the Boer lines of investment drew round Ladysmith. On Thursday, the last train passed down the railway under the fire of artillery. That night, the line was cut about 4 miles north of Colenso. Telegraphic communication also ceased. On Friday, Colenso was itself attacked. A heavy gun came into action from the hills which dominate the town, and the slender garrison of infantry, volunteers, and naval brigade evacuated in a hurry, and, covered to some extent by the armored train, fell back on Estcourt. Estcourt is a South African town, that is to say, it is a collection of about 300 detached stone or corrugated iron houses, nearly all one-storied, arranged along 2 broad streets, for space is plentiful, or straggling away towards the country. The little place lies in a cup of the hills, which rise in green undulations on all sides. For this reason, it will be a very difficult place to defend if the invaders should come upon it. It is, besides, of mean and insignificant aspect, but, like all these towns in Natal, it is the center of a large agricultural district, at once the market and the storehouse of dozens of prosperous farms scattered about the country, and consequently it possesses more importance than the passing stranger would imagine. Indeed, it was a surprise to find on entering the shops how great a variety and quantity of goods these unpretentious shanties contained. Estcourt now calls itself the Front. There is another front 40 miles away, but that is ringed about by the enemy, and since we live in expectation of attack, with no one but the Boers beyond the outpost line, Estcourt considers that its claim is just. Colonel Wolfe Murray, the officer who commands the lines of communication of the Natal Field Force, hastened up as soon as the news of the attack on Colenso was received to make preparation to check the enemy's advance. The force at his disposal is not, however, large 2 British battalions, the Dublin Fusiliers, who fought at Glencoe, and were hurried out of Ladysmith to strengthen the communications when it became evident that a blockade impended, and the Border Regiment from Malta, a squadron of the Imperial Light Horse, 300 natal volunteers with 25 cyclists, and a volunteer battery of 9-pounder guns, perhaps 2,000 men in all. With so few, it would be quite impossible to hold the long line of hills necessary for the protection of the town, but a position has been selected and fortified where the troops can maintain themselves, at any rate for several days. But the confidence of the military authorities in the strength of Estcourt may be gauged by the frantic efforts they are making to strengthen Pietermaritzburg, 76 miles, and even Durban, 130 miles further back, by earthworks and naval guns. The Boers invade Natal, exclaims Mr. Labouchere in the number of truth current out here. As likely that the Chinese army should invade London. But he is not the only false prophet. It seems, however, certain that a considerable force will be moved here soon to restore the situation and to relieve Ladysmith. Meanwhile, we wait, not without anxiety or impatience. The Imperial Horse, a few mounted infantry, the volunteer cyclists, and the armored train patrol daily towards Colenso in the north, always expecting to see the approaching Boer commandos. Yesterday, I traveled with the armored train. This armored train is a very puny specimen, having neither gun nor Maxims, with no roof to its trucks and no shutters to its loopholes, and being in every way inferior to the powerful machines I saw working along the southern frontier. Nevertheless, it is a useful means of reconnaissance, nor is a journey in it devoid of interest. An armored train. The very name sounds strange, a locomotive disguised as a knight-errant, the agent of civilization in the habiliments of chivalry. Mr. Morley attired as Sir Lancelot would seem scarcely more incongruous. The possibilities of attack added to the keenness of the experience. We started at 1 o'clock. A company of the Dublin Fusiliers formed the garrison. Half were in the car in front of the engine, half in that behind. 3 empty trucks, with a plate-laying gang and spare rails to mend the line, followed. The country between Estcourt and Colenso is open, undulating, and grassy. The stations, which occur every 4 or 5 miles, are hamlets consisting of half a dozen corrugated iron houses and perhaps a score of blue gum trees. These little specks of habitation are almost the only marked feature of the landscape, which on all sides spreads in pleasant but monotonous slopes of green. The train maintained a good speed, and though it stopped repeatedly to question Kaffirs or country folk, and to communicate with the cyclists and other patrols who were scouring the country on the flanks, reached Chively, 5 miles from Colenso, by about 3 o'clock, and from here the Ladysmith balloon, a brown speck floating above and beyond the distant hills, was plainly visible. Beyond Chively, it was necessary to observe more caution. The speed was reduced, the engine walked warily. The railway officials scanned the track, and often before a culvert or bridge was traversed, we disembarked and examined it from the ground. At other times, long halts were made while the officers swept the horizon and the distant hills with field glasses and telescopes. But the country was clear and the line undamaged, and we continued our slow advance. Presently, Colenso came into view, 100 tin pot houses under the high hills to the northward. We inspected it deliberately. On a mound beyond the village rose the outline of the sandbag fort constructed by the Naval Brigade. The flagstaff, without the flag, still stood up boldly. But so far as we could tell, the whole place was deserted. There followed a discussion. Perhaps the Boers were lying in wait for the armored train. Perhaps they had trained a gun on some telegraph post and would fire the moment the engine passed it. Or perhaps, again, they were even now breaking the line behind us. Some Kaffirs approached respectfully, saluting. A Natal volunteer, one of the cyclists, came forward to interrogate. He was an intelligent little man with a Martini Metford rifle, a large pair of field glasses, a dainty pair of gray skin cycling shoes, and a slouch hat. He questioned the natives and reported their answers. The Kaffirs said that the Dutchmen were assuredly in the neighborhood. They had been seen only that morning. How many? The reply was vague, 12 or 17 or 1,000. Also, they had a gun or 5 guns, mounted in the old fort, or on the platform of the station, or on the hill behind the town. At daylight, they had shelled Colenso. But why, we asked, should they shell Colenso? Evidently to make sure of the range of some telegraph post. It only takes 1 shell to do the trick with the engine, said the captain who commanded. Got to hit us first, though, he added. Well, let's get a little bit nearer. The electric bell rang 3 times, and we crept forward, halted, looked around, forward again, halt again, another look round, and so, yard by yard, we approached Colenso. Half a mile away, we stopped finally. The officer, taking a sergeant with him, went on towards the village on foot. I followed. We soon reached the trenches that had been made by the British troops before they evacuated the place. Awful rot giving this place up, said the officer. These lines took us a week to dig. From here, Colenso lay exposed about 200 yards away, a silent, desolate village. The The streets were littered with the belongings of the inhabitants. 2 or 3 houses had been burned. A dead horse lay in the road, his 4 legs sticking stiffly up in the air, his belly swollen. The whole place had evidently been ransacked and plundered by the Boers and the Kaffirs. A few natives loitered near the far end of the street, and one, alarmed at the aspect of the train, waved a white rag on a stick steadily to and fro. But no Dutchmen were to be seen. We made our way back to the railway line and struck it at the spot where it was cut. 2 lengths of rails had been lifted up, and with the sleepers attached to them, flung over the embankment. The broken telegraph wires trailed untidily on the ground. Several of the posts were twisted. But the bridge across the Tugela was uninjured, and the damage to the lines was such as could be easily repaired. The Boers realized the advantage of the railway. At this moment, with their trains all labeled to Durban, they are drawing supplies along it from Pretoria to within 6 miles of Ladysmith. They had resolved to use it in their further advance, and their confidence in the ultimate issue is shown by the care with which they avoid seriously damaging the permanent way. We had learned all that there was to learn, where the line was broken, that the village was deserted, that the bridge was safe, and we made haste to rejoin the train. Then the engine was reversed, and we withdrew out of range of the hills beyond Colenso at full speed, and some said that the Boers did not fire because they hoped to draw us nearer, and others that there were no Boers within 10 miles. On the way back, I talked with the volunteer. He was friendly and communicative. "Durban Light Infantry," he said. "That's my corps. I'm a builder myself by trade, 9 men under me, but I had to send them all away when I was called out. I don't know how I'm going on when I get back after it's over. Oh, I'm glad to come. I wish I was in Ladysmith. You see, these Dutchmen have come quite far enough into our country. The imperial government promised us protection. You've seen what protection Colenso got. Dundee and Newcastle, just the same. I don't doubt they've tried their best, and I don't blame them, but we want help here badly. I don't hold with a man crying out for help unless he makes a start himself, so I came out. I'm a cyclist. I've got 8 medals at home for cycling." "How will you like a new one, with the Queen's head on it?" His eye brightened. "Ah," he said, "I should treasure that more than all the other 8, even more than the 20-mile championship one." So we rattled back to Estcourt through the twilight, and the long car, crowded with brown-clad soldiers who sprawled smoking on the floor or lounged against the sides. The rows of loopholes along the iron walls, the black smoke of the engine bulging overhead, the sense of headlong motion, and the atmosphere of war made the volunteer seem perhaps more than he was. And I thought him a true and valiant man who had come forward in time of trouble quietly and soberly to bear his part in warfare, and who was ready, if necessary, to surrender his humble life in honorably sustaining the quarrel of the state. Nor do I care to correct the impression now.
This concludes today's reading of London to Ladysmith via Pretoria, by Winston S. Churchill. Join us also tomorrow for the subsequent chapter. Subscribe to Major Antonio's channel. Thanks for listening, and so long.